Hi, biology. It's Noel. I'm sorry I've been sick for a while, but I'll hopefully be back tomorrow. I know I sound like a crazy person, but I also know you guys are freaking out about the quiz that's on Wednesday, and so I want to kind of help you remind you that you know all the things you need to know for the quiz already. Okay, so that quiz wants to make sure you understand binomial nomenclature, which is the genus and species way we name things, and also so make sure you know the genus and species is always in italics. The genus is always capitalized, but the species is never capitalized, okay? So that's important. You don't have to know all of these things, but you do have to know the labels. And you'll be given a chart kind of like this that looks like this, where you're not given any of the taxa, but you do have to remember how to label them. And remember, we said the way that at least the way that I like to remember them is: did King Philip come over for good spaghetti? Okay. So D is domain. It is not division. Don't put division. That's incorrect. K is for kingdom. Kingdom. P is for phylum. C is for class. O is for order. F is for family. And then G is for genus. S is for species. Okay, so make sure you can fill those guys in. Easy peasy. Now, if we look at this, we have some animals: raccoon, fox, jackal, gray wolf, dog, and we want to create a phylogenetic tree for these animals. A phylogenetic tree, or a cladogram, depending on who you're talking to about it, is that one where it looks like this, and then you have the least related species. The species at the bottom here is least related to the species at the top here. And we can say that as they branch, we have created a classification where everything above that branch has all the characteristics, everything below that branch is missing some characteristic. So if we look here, our two most closely related species, and this says based on the classification above, so our two most closely related species here are the gray wolf and the dog. The dog is actually a subspecies of the wolf. That's why it has two common names. Sorry, not two common names, two species names. Don't worry too much about that. But that means they're going to be the closest related. Okay, so we can see we have three animals within the Canis genus, and then we have something in the Vulpes and something in the Procyon. So how will these things work out? So we have three animals within Canis. Okay, so if we say this is Canis, everything above this is a canid. Then we have an animal, we'll have the jackal, and then this, we don't know which one came first or whatever. We actually technically do, but we don't care. We'll have the wolf and the dog. Okay, so it's not more complicated than that. That's all it is. So everything above this is a canid. Excuse me. And if you had flipped this so the wolf was here and the dog was here, you would not be wrong, okay? Because everything kind of can rotate on the axis of a pivot point like this. You could also rotate this one, and so you have these two over here, and that just make it as easy as you can for yourself. Okay, so we've put the three canids on our tree. Let's put the vulpes or the fox. Okay, so here, this is going to be the vulpes, and so this is the fox, the red fox. And then the last one we have is going to be the raccoon. Raccoon. Two C's. Boom. And then this. So what does everything have in common above this? They are all in carnivora. Carnivora. Okay. What do they have in common? Okay. And so this is now in the blah, 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 blah. This guy, the Procyonidae. Cyanidae. Everything, so on this, if you were on a road, you were driving this way, you would say, okay, everything beyond here is in this group, is in this family. But if I keep going this way, everything in this group is in the Canidae. The Canidae, or the dogs, okay? So if I keep going, everything above this is in that family, the Canidae. Or the Canidae. Oh my gosh, you guys, I'm dying. I'm not dying. Everything's fine. Then if we keep going, we have a split where if you go in one direction, you're going to be going into the genus Vulpes. And if you go in the other direction, you're going to be going into Canis. Awesome. And then we keep going. We get this again, another split in the road where you're either going to be a jackal or you're going to keep going and you're going into Familiaris. Or sorry, you're going into Lupus, the species Lupus. And it's, these should be, since we can't write in italics, don't even pretend like you can. We don't like it. Just underline anything that should be in italics. So if it's Canis, that's a genus name, so that gets an underline, and Lupus is the species name. So again, if we're traveling up this little road that is this phylogenetic tree, once we pass the family Okay, well, we can either go into the jackal species, or, which we should write here, is Arius. Okay, or we can go into lupus, which includes the wolf and the dog. Okay, so that's how you create your phylogenetic tree. Don't overthink it. That's literally all there is. Okay, let's go on. There are many breeds of dogs as a result of artificial selection. What is the difference? So we know that natural selection is organisms survival is dependent on environmental pressure. So what seeds, when we did this lab, it was what, oh, you can't see that. Organismal survival is dependent on environmental pressures, such as food availability. It could be other resources, whatever. We didn't go into that in a lot of detail, but that's a good one. Other resources like, can you find a material to survive, whatever. And ability to mate. Ability to pass on, oh, you guys, pass on the genes through reproduction. Okay, so this is 100% under the control of nature. Can you throw an animal into the wild or just find an animal in the wild and it's surviving based on the environment that it's in and the genes that it has, and it can't just survive, it has to pass those genes on. So there's two things to natural selection. Can you survive the environmental pressures, and can you pass on those genes? That's what's going to determine if your species survives. In artificial selection, see, I can sing even when I'm sick. Yeah, no, it's bad. In artificial selection, humans assist in organisms, organism survival. Okay, so a Pomeranian, those little foofy dogs that are like, bloop, and they're like all fluff, okay, and they have little tiny feet, and they think they're really tough, would not survive in the wild, okay? If you throw a Pomeranian into a gray wolf's natural habitat, it's going to go looking for treats because it knows that people have treats for it. The whole reason this animal looks like this and not a wolf, even though technically dogs can breed with wolves because they're the same species. The reason why they won't is because there's a size difference that becomes a big issue. There's also, they can't survive in the wild because they are dependent on humans for survival, okay? So humans pick traits that we like. Humans pick traits to breed out. Breed in organisms during domestication. So small fluffiness. So Pomeranians, the current theory is that Pomeranians and other dogs like them were only, they were bred because they help keep people warm, and so they're lap dogs. So they would, in drafty castles or whatever, they would help keep people warm. There are other dogs that were bred specifically for their hunting ability, and there's lots of tests that have been done in dogs showing that they can't go very far in a maze. But they will work really well with a person, and so they have this ability to look straight at a person and say, hey, you're supposed to be helping me, dude. Why aren't you helping me get this treat? Whereas a wolf can go a lot farther in a maze, but they do not trust people. Okay, so this is part of the reason why you can't take a wild animal and make it a pet. It is not used to people. It hasn't been... there is nothing about the artificial selection going on that makes it say, hey, yeah, I like people. I'm not going to bite their faces off. So there's that. Okay, so so natural selection, the organism's survival is dependent on environmental pressures and the ability to pass on genes, whereas in artificial selections, humans assist in the organism's survival and pick out traits to breed during domestication. So if you think about the Brussels sprout, Brussels sprouts and broccoli and cauliflower and a couple other things, these are actually all from the same species. They do not look like this in the wild, but in the case of the Brussels sprouts, we bred a certain mutant of this species, so it has these really big stalks and these gigantic flower buds, and those are the Brussels sprouts. In the case of the broccoli, we said, well, I don't want the big stalks, I want it to be small, and then I want it to have a giant flower, and that's the broccoli part. In the case of the cauliflower, they did the same thing, except they selected mutants of the plant that do not have chlorophyll in them, and so they've done something else in that case. But these things would not survive in the wild. The cauliflower wouldn't survive in the wild. It doesn't have enough chlorophyll, so it would die out. Okay, broccoli doesn't produce enough leaves to support itself in the wild. It has to get a lot of nutrients from humans. Same thing with Brussels sprouts. These are domesticated, artificially selected organisms that humans have to help survive. They wouldn't survive in the wild. Okay, moving on. You've introduced a new species, a tanuki, which is sometimes called the raccoon dog. You know, it has simple pack-like behavior, can be infected by the same diseases as dogs, which means it's very closely related, and it's known to hibernate. Where would you put it on your tree? Okay, so where would you put this thing? It's closely related to a dog, so because you know it can breed with them. It also looks a lot like a raccoon, that's why it's called that, and it has simple pack-like behavior. So you have to know a little bit about these animals to kind of get some information, and on the quiz you'll be given a lot more information for this. But originally the question had a bear on it, and so bears hibernate, and so they're kind of down here. But so as long as you put it anywhere, so it can share diseases with dogs, which means that it's probably high up on, it's got something very closely related to a dog. So technically the raccoon dog is down here. It's like whoop here. So the tanuki is here. But if you put it anywhere, as long as you put it anywhere above Canidae, you are correct. Okay, so as long as you didn't put it below the raccoon, because the raccoon is far enough away from the dog that it doesn't share diseases. It's really hard for diseases to jump species. So as long as you put it anywhere within the family Canidae, you are correct. If you put it here, though, incorrect. That doesn't make sense. That means it's a fox. It's not in the dog. It's not more towards the dogs, okay? It has to be somewhere either coming off the direct line that says it's Canidae, or you could put it above lupus to say it's really closely related to the wolf or the dog, okay? Hopefully that makes sense. Here's another phylogenetic tree looking at some interesting traits. Bat, mouse, bird, crocodile, what's happening there? So obviously this is not a complete tree. Birds are more closely related to, well, no, they're not. Birds, okay, let's just go. Birds are more closely related to crocodiles than they are mice. Let's talk about homologous and analogous traits, okay? So all of these organisms, again, if we follow this tree up, it looks a little different, but it's okay. If we follow this tree up, everything above this point has 4 legs, okay, or has 4 limbs, okay? And 2 points in genetic history, or evolutionary history, we see those 4 limbs becoming wings, okay? So what traits above are homologous? So homologous means they are closely related, but they're used for different stuff. Okay, so that's like the dolphin. Oh, hello, cat. Come on. Did you miss my cat? Nobody missed my cat. That means that this is something like the dolphin flipper and the human hand. Okay, so if you look inside of a dolphin flipper, there are fingers, but they don't use their fingers like we use fingers. They have them all fused together and they use them as a flipper. Okay, so that's a homologous trait. So where would you see homology? You would see that bats and mice both have 4 limbs. Bat and mouse. Hello. The 4 limbs are homologous. So they somehow, where in history, they have a common ancestor that had 4 limbs. And in one case, they turned them into wings. In the other case, they kept them as feet. So wings and feet. Okay, so a bat can actually not walk on its front. It can barely walk on its feet at all. Its hind legs are so weak that they'll break if they walk on them. So that's a fun fact you don't actually need to know. Okay, so homology is where they're related but used for different things, which means the next question, what's seen in this tree are analogous. Analogous is like, if you make an analogy in English or in history, you're making an example that's sort of the same, but it's trying to help you remember it in a different way. So analogy in biology, if you have something that's analogous, it has a different ancestor, but same purpose. It's much more random. Much more random. And it's much more affected by, how do I want to describe it? Much more affected or driven, let's say driven, by environmental pressures. Mental pressures. So somewhere in history, there was a rodent, somewhere in evolutionary history, there was a rodent that said, you know what would be awesome? Flying after food. And somewhere in history, there was also, totally random and separate from this bat, was a lizard, or a dinosaur-like organism, that said, hey, or a dinosaur actually, that what would be awesome? Flying after food. And then through a bunch of genetic mutations and pressure pushing on those genetic mutations, you got two different organisms that have wings. So they turn their forelimbs into wings. So the analogous example is going to be wings in bats and birds. They're not related. They seem to pop up randomly on evolutionary trees. Okay, but they have same purpose, but solve the same problem. Okay, so in the case of homology, you're looking at two similar structures used to solve different problems. Okay, solve different problems. In the case of analogy, you have two different species or even families that are using this different structures to solve the same problem. So homology is different problems, analogy is same problems. Okay, so hopefully that's all we've covered so far in terms of evolution. So hopefully this makes some sense. I will be on campus tomorrow, and I will see you all soon. Bye.